All right.
Great, thanks. Steve, do you want to do a little intro and then I can walk us through?
Sure, and maybe it's probably fitting before we get into anything is just acknowledge John Romano's passing. I understand, this was a topic near and dear to his heart, and he cared about the harbor a lot. I'm getting to know him a little bit over the time I've been in Norwalk, and so just extend our condolences to his family and also to his colleagues on the Harbor Management Commission, because I know he's going to be missed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And from that point, I'll probably kick it over to Zoe to take us through. And as I think Michelle put in the email, not go through the plan, as we've looked at, it before in terms of the recommendations. We kind of knew what was coming from that regard, but just to handle kind of things that you guys wanted to talk about, questions, comments, and then Zoe can take you through kind of any other process questions and things we want to chat about.
Great, thanks, Steve. Yeah, so this will be kind of a more open format than what we've done before. It's mostly driven by you all. There's just, two small items that we wanted to kind of share with you all at the outset for discussion before diving into the report. So the first is we got sort of one bit of public comment that we wanted to share with you all for consideration. And then the second is we had the opportunity to attend the National Working Waterfronts Conference just a few weeks back, which was hosted in Boston and had a lot of people dealing with similar issues to Norwalk. And we had the benefit of having a conversation with some people there that seemed relevant to share with you all relative to the Marina District. So I'll start with the sort of the public comment. I'll just share a brief slide so you have like a visual reference for the nature of the comment. 1 second. I'll make it full screen so you can see more easily. The person who commented was interested in particular in the inner harbor industrial areas that were along the waterfront, and was interested in seeing our recommendations more explicitly protect or incentivize waterborne transportation capacity. And the sites that this person was most interested in are the ones that are highlighted here in kind of red and blue here. The addresses are listed out. This is, the recommendations that we have right now are not in conflict with this, but I think the sort of the thing for consideration is whether there's any appetite to shift the recommendations on these parcels to be more, explicitly along the lines of the, marine commercial versus the heavy industrial zoning, which is what all of these parcels are currently and what we'd recommended that they remain. And the main kind of, from our perspective, from a more technical perspective, the main sort of constraints for consideration here is that all of these sites really don't have great landside logistical support, as in the ability to support larger volumes of truck traffic, servicing them from the land side. And additionally, the current rail line doesn't have the sort of as much freight rail capacity as you might assume. It sort of needs additional upgrades or investments to be able to sort of serve as a significant resource for these sites to handle landside distribution of materials that might arrive by water. So that's kind of the sort of the factors that are worth considering. And we just wanted to kind of bring it to this group for discussion and sort of hear out any things that you think are worth considering as we kind of evaluate whether it would make sense to shift these to a marine commercial versus the heavy industrial. The last thing that I will mention before just opening up for comment or questions is that right now, the only one that sort of explicitly fits the marine commercial designation is this one that's highlighted in blue. So the Divine Brothers, they are actively using the water. They are a water dependent industrial use. All of the other uses that are highlighted on these red parcels currently are not water dependent industrial uses. So they would, there would be some issues around nonconformity, around sort of managing that for the current users of those sites if we were to pursue a recommendation that these become marine commercial.
I mean, it seems to me that the problem of secondary transportation, of getting any materials off those sites in any significant numbers, doesn't make it practical, number one. Number two, we haven't heard from anyone throughout this discussion that I recall who expressed any interest in attempting anything like this. So that even if we were to alter the zoning to somehow make it a permitted use, would there be any interest in using it, given the logistical issues involved?
Well, if I can chime in on that one, we had discussed, or actually discussed with individual Bob Kunkel, although I haven't heard back from him in recently, of keeping this area open since Norwalk is still on the Marine Commercial Highway for just transportation of goods and services around from, for example, Long Island. I don't know how involved Bob is getting with doing that type of commerce, but I thought perhaps we could maintain a flexibility because I think it's an important feature to perhaps keep this area open for bringing goods and services up, actually goods up to that area by water. Even though I know we can see we don't have that much province, maybe the O&G area right there might be a possible connection point. Instead of bringing trucks up into that area, we bring, for example, goods by barge or by the service boat that he has, that new lithium battery powered vessel that he has, bringing produce back and forth.
Can I ask Steve and maybe Zoe a question though? Industrial doesn't preclude
Correct.
Marine industrial, right?
So our current recommendation would allow for water-dependent industrial use. It just wouldn't require water-dependent industrial use. So that's the main shift that we're discussing is not necessarily whether it's possible to operate a facility like you're describing, John, the Harbor Harvest concept, but whether we want to sort of tag these sites as being exclusively for businesses of that variety or for businesses that are water dependent.
You're talking heavy marine commercial would be, or actually commercial zone would be the type of operation that Divine Brothers currently has, gravel, etc.
Yeah, so it would include both.
But it wouldn't preclude
yes.
a lighter marine, like the current I zoning would not preclude a lighter marine industrial use. I think what this comment is suggesting that it should be exclusively marine industrial under the requirements, the categories and requirements that are required for marine industrial now. So it wouldn't preclude, John, the scenario that our current proposal wouldn't preclude the scenario that you're talking about. Maybe the other way to think about this in context is, the full portfolio of required marine commercial, and whether the city wants to preserve this only for marine commercial for an economic development or a kind of land use strategy. But again, our current proposal doesn't preclude marine industrial from happening here.
Yeah, accurate.
If I could add in, this is Sabrina. I think keeping it more flexible rather than more restrictive, to your point, if you can still do that marine commercial type of use on the industrial zone site, I don't want to change it to just marine commercial and have that as a requirement, because don't want to box ourselves into something that might lead to increased vacancy, 10 years from now or whatever that situation looks like as well.
Can I ask Lou?
Go ahead, please.
So for example, if hypothetically King Industries decided to sell off one of their parcels or all of their parcels, they obviously have the most waterfront, and while they're an industrial use, they're actually not water dependent at all, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, they're not bringing in anything on a barge.
The only thing that I'd have to just, it might be worth a little bit of verification, because there is kind of a wrinkle in water dependent, that sometimes there's operations like something that might have a high fire risk or have a high need for water, like a wastewater treatment facility. It's not water dependent in the sense that it is using the water for deliveries or for interactions, but sometimes those uses are in fact water dependent because they require a large volume of water, so they need to have easy access to the water. So might be worth a little bit of follow-up on that if we're really considering it seriously in terms of their property. But from on face value alone, I would assume that they are not water dependent, but I don't want to unilaterally state that because I don't know for sure.
Well, right now, the only property that is even in question for future use is the cement factory on the east side of the river, because it's not functioning. Divine Brothers is functioning, King Industries is functioning. But if they were to close their doors, then that opens the opportunity for something new. So we're trying to define, do we want it to be marine dependent or industry that needs water dependent, which isn't the same thing, right?
The current marine commercial zone is inclusive of both industrial water dependent uses and commercial water dependent uses. So it sort of comes as in the current zoning comes as sort of a package deal. But the heavy industrial zone does allow for almost all the same uses that you would see within the marine commercial. It just doesn't require that it's exclusively those uses. If that helps clarify
a little bit. And Mr. Jackson's letter was talking about, the idea, it seemed to me that he was trying to present that a barge type boat would come up the river and then offload whatever it had and put it on a train, because there are some train tracks there. But you were talking earlier, there's not a lot of great road access, like that Jennings Road is a horrible hill that goes over the train tracks. And King Industries has sort of the flattest parcel there. So, I'm not any type of a logistical engineer. I don't know that trains can just stop in the middle of the train tracks and load stuff. Don't they have to be kind of at a train depot? So there's no area really for a depot along there. There is, potential conversation of putting a commuter train station back up past the bridge at, right up at the head of the river. What do we call that little area there? The Wall Street Bridge. I don't know if that's the name of the bridge, but you know what I mean, where Wall Street goes, the river goes under, but that's sort of the end of the accessibility for the train track. So
Tammy, I don't see why you couldn't have a lot of places that have these, for example, train access, they may have a spur, for example, that might come off the main rail so if there's land available for that certainly those services can be provided. It's not that it's just locked into what's currently there now. It's just having rail service, which is primarily passenger train, going toward Danbury. But there's no reason why a side spur can't be incorporated if the land is available for that use to serve such a purpose of shipping by rail.
Okay.
So
it seems as if
flexibility, if the flexibility is there.
We've gotten off the topic here.
Oh.
There is nothing in what's being recommended that precludes any of this. So we don't need to get into the weeds of the details of this.
Well, that was my question. I appreciate what you're saying, But if we can maintain some sort of flexibility in that area, then that would be fine.
Well, and I think that's what the recommended zoning gives us, the flexibility
Right.
to go either way on this, without in any way diminishing the
No, I agree.
the current occupant.
Details here. We're not arguing the details here, but it's certainly the flexibility to maintain that area to take advantage of the resources that we might have, water and rail in that particular area.
Yeah, just to summarize, this is Tim. I think Sabrina's viewpoint is one strong point of view, which is our current recommendation already allows for the full range of marine industrial uses. That's the more flexible option. I understand where the letter writer is coming from. This is a broader policy lens that's happening up and down the New England coast, which is there's a certain group of advocates who are saying where rail comes close to the water, require marine industrial because there's limited sites, from New York north where those two things happen to intersect. And so, but that might be better regional policy, but it results in probably less flexibility for Norwalk. So I think it's a simple choice, which is, do you want it to only be marine industrial because of that unique confluence of rail and water, or do you want the market to figure it out, which I think is what Sabrina is arguing for from the city.
Yeah, and I think our current recommendation is a good way of a sort of retaining the option for the future, which is the main, from that sort of big picture policy angle that Tim is talking about, is really about protecting the option to do, to make use of this unique circumstance, right? And we're still protecting that option.
Yeah, I think
by not letting it transition to residential or non-industrial use.
That's right. I think keeping it having it be industrial is enough of a preservation strategy for those future scenarios to be possible. Because once that's industrial, the highest and best use, especially on the west side of the Upper Harbor, is something that can take advantage of the berthing possibilities. So I think the market will figure it out if we just leave it as industrial.
Okay, no, I agree.
Great. So I think that's any other last thoughts on that. It sounds like we have a pretty comfortable convergence of perspectives.
Steve, does that make sense to you too?
Yeah, that's what we kind of kicked around initially. So I agree.
Okay, great. So that's.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask this in a way that doesn't sound absolutely insane, but we have it as flexible as we can, which is great. But is there anything in there that for some reason down the line, 10 years from now or so, Divine's like, you know what, I'm shut it down, I'm good to go, which I hope and pray never, ever happens. But if that were to happen, is there something in the zoning that would allow, say somebody buys it all up and then nobody's water dependent anymore and then we don't get dredged? Is there something that zoning can do to say we at least need to have one or something like that so that we keep getting that? Or can we not? That's spot zoning kind of. I don't know if I asked that question correctly, but
I would think that they would have to provide some kind of water dependent use, but whether that particular water dependent use was significant enough for that to aid us in getting funding to dredge is a different question, which would be hard to really answer.
Well, to answer that question, Steve, we are off the federal navigation project. As far as Norwalk is concerned, being a mid-sized harbor, any dredging that would have to be done would be on our own dollar.
Okay.
We would ask for special appropriations to Congress in order to do that. But my point in here too was that if we did maintain, again, to be recognized as part of the National Marine Highways section, that we would certainly keep the door open for perhaps funding from federal dollars. But right now, all the dredging that we've done so far was through special appropriations and through the state of Connecticut.
Awesome. Thank you for responding to that. That makes it a lot more clear for me. Thank you.
Okay. I think that closes the book on this question. So if everybody feels similarly, I'll transition into the second thing. All good?
Yep.
Okay. I'll stop sharing. So the second piece is really just a sort of a verbal or like anecdotal thing that I wanted to share with you all. So there was a participant in the conference who is coming from Portland, Maine, and they saw we shared a little bit about the sort of mixed use model, marine commercial model that we've been workshopping with you all over the course of the last several months. And so they shared that they had pursued a very similar model in their city, and that it's been, working well, but that one of the things that they would suggest we sort of consider embedding in our sort of model is some sort of way of discouraging the subdivision of parcels between the sort of street side and the water, to sort of hold those as contiguous parcels from street to water as much as possible, because that really helps to facilitate a sort of mutual recognition of any sort of mixture of uses on the street side versus the water side, that they are tied together by a piece of land, and that sort of requires a more collaborative relationship between those different uses that they've found to be more successful in sort of managing that mix. So it's a more fine-grained recommendation, but it's something that we thought was worth sort of sharing with you all as sort of a lesson learned from a similar setting elsewhere.
Zoe, just a question about that,
Mm-hmm.
and I should have asked earlier. Under what mechanism can a city keep somebody from subdividing their parcel legally?
I think that at the sort of most of the, there's like subdivision sort of rules at a district scale for some cities. I don't know the sort of the granular qualities of the zoning code in Norwalk enough to know like what the device would be, but I think it's within the sort of land and parcel subdivision sort of regulation. So it is something that can be like a minimum parcel size is what's more typical, that you can't subdivide beyond a particular size. But I think within a similar frame of reference, you could introduce
a similar legal framework.
Yeah. Okay. So it's something that, it's not really, at the level of detail that this study is, it's not, it's a little bit more in the weeds than what we've, the level of guidance that we're giving, but it's something that might be worth looking into as the city gets further along with the sort of, tweaks to the zoning at the level of the like individual sort of pieces of the code.
And so I think to restate what you're saying, if you own a parcel from Water Street to the water's edge, you can't subdivide it so that half the parcel is landlocked and half the parcel still faces the water, because it would defeat the development strategy that we're recommending, which is that in exchange for improving the water side access through an additional berths or improvements, upgrade of a marina, you can do X. That is all.
That all works better when there's a sort of a more, when the two entities are tied together more closely by an actual shared asset versus just being neighbors.
Well, the other simpler way is that you don't have any development rights unless you do the water improvements, which means you have to keep it all one parcel.
What happens if they're already subdivided?
There's
Water Street to the harbor, there are lots of lots that already are, and someone owns half and the other one owns the other half.
Yeah, so I think it would, there's from my understanding, there's very little to be done retroactively to sort of bring those parcels back together, right? But for the ones that remain intact, there's tools to sort of hold them to that more.
But there is a possibility, because I'm working on this with another project, which is that you would only have development rights east of Water Street if your parcel was contiguous to the waterfront, which would inspire the market to combine those parcels to then be able to develop the parcel that touches the Water Street sidewalk. So
it's sort of like the carrot versus the stick. So you can't require people to consolidate their parcels, but you can sort of incentivize it.
Which is certainly the strategy for zoning codes that have a minimum parcel size, and incentivize individual owners if they're interested in, redeveloping to combine parcels to exceed the threshold. So I know that legally you can structure a zoning requirement that way.
But the people who already own half, like the Water Street side of a parcel, and they don't own all the way down to the water,
right?
They still have the ability to buy and sell that parcel, right?
That's right.
That parcel, and someone can buy it. And is their use now non-conforming? What will that use be in the future? Because you're really going to hurt people's property values there. Or conceivably, one could hurt those property.
Right.
I wouldn't think that, similar, if you remember what we did with the rezoning in East Norwalk so you have the underlying base zoning, which grants you X amount of development. But if you do these certain improvements, you can do X plus Y. So I think to Tim's point, the incentive would be if you only had, say that you only had your parcel went halfway to the water and then somebody else had the parcel to the back, you might not get to, you could still do, potentially something under the current zoning, but the incentive to do something more might require you to get additional land, which goes down to the water, which would then trigger the required improvements to the water side of the parcels. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but doesn't. Because you have people who are going to want to sell that property, and right now it's pretty valuable. And if they go to sell it in 5 years and it's not valuable because they only own half of it and the other people don't want to sell,
I wouldn't think it would be any less valuable than it is today. I think the value, if the underlying zoning doesn't change, then it's not any less valuable. But right. it might be more valuable if they could obtain additional property, which would then trigger the improvements to the water side and the water dependent use side of it. So it's the carrot approach. So we'll give you something, but you're going to give us something in that we want in return.
Steve, do we have any idea how many properties might be involved?
I think just along that whole frontage, Zoe, I think it's just 2 or 3 that is subdivided front to back, right?
Yeah. The rest I'll bring up a visual 1 second.
Most of them extend from Water Street to the water.
There's a few to the north, but more to the south.
So apologies that this isn't bigger, but you can see that, there's like this one has a carve out. This one has been subdivided. This one has quite a few subdivisions on the street side, but you can see there's still, I would say like 2/3 of the parcels are, intact all the way through from the street to the water, and then the remaining third have been subdivided in some way.
I suspect, having looked at those parcels a lot in Google View and looked at some on the ground, that even though some of those subdivisions that are showing up on the parcel map might be legal subdivisions, but it looks like some of those are a single operation, and it might be for land trust issues or something. They were maintained as individual parcels, even though they're run as one business. So it's a common strategy to write zoning code to incentivize development at a scale that you want it to happen.
Yeah, so that's kind of another sort of similar to the our sort of other conversations, sort of like something that, at the scale of this report, at the sort of the level of detail that we're going into, it's a little bit sort of beyond what we're describing, but it's something that we wanted to kind of share with you all as something that might be worth sort of keeping in back of mind as you get further along in the process, that treating this set of development rights as an incentive to drive the kind of changes you'd like to see, even at the level of parcel ownership or parcel size, might be worth considering. Even though there's trade-offs to it, there's, some at an individual property owner level, there might be conversations that need to be had to just understand how smooth that process would be.
What exactly are the water dependent uses you're talking about? I'm not sure I'm really 100% clear on that.
In the Marine Commercial District on Water Street?
Yeah.
There's a variety right now, but the current uses range from, there's marine construction business, there's the marinas, there's ship and boat repair. So it's all of those are sort of, within the purview of existing water dependent commercial uses that would stand to benefit from sort of the cross subsidy from new development rights. So that would be the kind of the relationship that we're trying to create.
Restaurants where you can dock at the restaurant, like they have those in Florida that I've seen, where it's, you could drive up and to the restaurant on one side, and on the other side they have docks, so people come in their boats. Is that considered a marine dependent use?
I think the restaurant itself wouldn't be water dependent, but it would be a good complementary use to existing water dependent industrial use if it was conceived of as something that was sort of taken advantage of, the sort of that relationship. But the restaurant on its own wouldn't be a water dependent use because people can arrive by land or by water, so it's not it doesn't require the water.
I think within the context of the larger concept, if you wanted to build a restaurant and your ability to do that meant that you had to increase the number of boat berths and make other improvements to get permission to do that, that's in a way the spirit of this. And berths beyond the berths of just people coming to the restaurant, you'd have to do something above and beyond that to be determined in a later, more detailed phase to be given the right to build the restaurant, which is to do water-facing improvements that would be, in a way, cross-subsidized by the attractiveness to that developer to have that restaurant built, as an example.
And some of the marinas down there already have restaurants. You have South North Boat Club, you have Ashoda Boat Club. They have restaurants down there as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. And full disclosure, my son-in-law owns a parcel that's on the street side where he has a fish wholesaling business.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we'd like to see on the street side of those parcels, right? Is saying there's some more, critical, like truly they cannot operate if they don't have access to the water, businesses that should be focused along the water, but that the kinds of businesses we'd like to see and stimulate and encourage to open up along the street side would ideally have some kind of relationship, whether it's conceptual or marketing or, actual shared customers with the water dependent uses, so that there is that sort of mutual interest in sort of thinking about these issues at a district scale and really trying to create a good experience for everyone.
I mean, on one side, to the Water Street side, you have one of the facilities has marine supplies.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then of course, if you're talking about Pagano's, down right outside of Ashoda Boat Club,
I'm talking about Pagano's.
That's certainly a symbiotic relationship there too.
Mm-hmm.
For people that can. Obviously, Ashoda does not bring in goods and services from them, but certainly there's maybe a complementary use.
Yeah, and you're not exactly getting huge catches from Long Island Sound, of fish.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a limit to what you could possibly get from the water side in Long Island Sound. It's not like you're in Chesapeake Bay or you're, in Massachusetts where you've actually got the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
You've got oysters, you've got.
Well, that's still a big business here in Norwalk.
No, I understand that it is, but that's the only fish business that comes from the sound here in Norwalk.
Yeah, so I think this is a good, like, kind of in a sense a coda to, like, this is what we're trying to achieve, is like we're trying to incentivize this kind of relationship. We're trying to signal that we want to see that development, that complementary relationship between the street side uses and the water side uses, and we want to see an uptick in investment. So we're just, there's like a couple of those little, finer grain details at later stages that, might help to really, be the cherry on top to try and bring that shift about, and to try and sort of reward the places that are already doing it. So I think with that, I'm inclined to transition into just, directed by you all, any aspects of the draft report that you want to direct our attention to, that you have feedback for us on. And yeah, sort of the floor is yours. I can pull up the documents if there's something in particular that you want to direct our attention to, but yeah, would love to hear any reactions you had, any feedback you have for us, so that we can make any necessary revisions before we go to the public with it.
I have one technical question, Zoe. It's pretty easy. It's on the map on page 8. In the green or yellow residential legend, Lockwood Matthews Park, that area, it's just north of 95, west of the purple King Industries. You have it as residential. And I'm just curious, it has a Stepping Stones Museum and it has the Lockwood Matthews Mansion. And it's nice because it's a lot of open space, but I wouldn't consider it residential. But maybe that's a question for Steve Kleppen.
Yeah, I can give a basic, and Steve, feel free to jump in. So this is true for a lot of zoning codes across the US, that it's sort of like cumulative. So the most restrictive zone is the lowest density residential zone. And so that's often used interchangeably for low density residential and for open space and other sort of more restricted uses. I think, some municipalities are transitioning away from that as they're, looking at zoning updates going forward, but it's more of an indication this is a very restricted zone in terms of what you can do here. And so it's currently in the AAA resident zone, but it doesn't mean that it's intended to transition to residential.
Zoe, just for the clarity of the plan, should we include in parentheses and open space after residential, just on these keys, so that it's a good point.
I think it's true. It's a can be confusing at a conceptual level, especially when you haven't spent time with the sort of granular pieces of the zoning code. So I think it's a good thing to point out for collective understanding. And
I would say and open space, and not just open space in parentheses, so people understand. That's an excellent comment. Yeah.
The draft zoning we're working on has a new civic zone, so all that kind of property will go into that. So yeah, and you're right. It was AAA zone to protect it more than anything else.
I mean, some of those shades of pink are really hard to decipher. You guys are so in sync with it, you might see the differences, but I think if we showed this to the average resident, they wouldn't be able to distinguish, but it might not be worth distinguishing. I'm not sure.
For these ones, Tammy, is that those are ones you're referring to? Yeah.
Yeah, business 1, 2, central business, water. I'm reasonably creative and artistic, and those shades are pretty challenging.
Yeah, I think also in the frame of our current map, the only places where we have the business number 1 and 2 is this tiny fragment here. So it might be worth, just for the sake of clarity, pulling those off, because it's not.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. One of the challenges is that for different use categories, there's accepted colors that you have to use. So, residential is yellow, industrial is purple. And so when municipalities have a lot of variations of business commercial, which is the reds, we're often in this kind of Rand McNally map problem that how many reds can we come up with?
Oh, I see. Okay.
You see?
Good. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And so it's
total sense.
And that's, for both professional planners and seasoned advocates. They've been trained to understand generally what the land use colors mean, and so it's always a problem.
Okay. Well,
How many
thanks.
flavors
I
of red?
realize
It's like
that.
how many words do Eskimos have for snow? Was an old expression, right?
Yeah, so I think for this one, maybe the easiest thing for us to do, acknowledging that constraint, is to just pull these business number 1 and 2 off this map, because it's conceptually irrelevant to what we're talking about, because it's in this tiny little swath right here. And that'll, I think, the differentiation between neighborhood business, central business district, and which actually this just reminds me, marine commercial is missing from this legend.
And while we're on maps, I did send it in to Michelle, but on map 11, it makes it look like people live in the wastewater treatment plant. There's lots of little dots in there. So I think you want to move those dots out.
Yeah, can do. Yeah, this is a common thing that happens for census data that's at a larger scale. They usually successfully exclude from open space, but sometimes they don't exclude from other parcels that don't have any residential use. So we can correct for that.
That's a bit, because it's also a very large chunk of land down there.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Great. Any other general or specific comments you want to bring our attention to?
Just, it's not even a comment necessarily related to the plan, but just to give everybody a heads up, kind of what was a little different process-wise, what we're going to do with this versus the industrial zones, just based on timing, is the industrial zones study was done. We're in the process of amending the citywide plan for that, and then passing change to the zoning map and the zoning text, which probably will occur in September, I would guess. This one, I think what we'll probably do is work on amending the citywide plan to incorporate these recommendations, and then have the zoning follow at a little later date, and probably wrap into the broader rewrite, because I just don't think it's worth having a separate effort going on and then a couple months later doing the whole zoning package again. So just a kind of a heads up on that. But that must mean you guys did such a good job, because that is worrying about a couple colors on the map seems like a pretty minor
but I want to thank Tammy again for zeroing in on stuff we should have caught. So awesome.
Yeah, appreciate that. The detailed review is always helpful, because after looking at things for a long time, it takes extra effort to not miss the little details. So appreciate that. Makes a difference. Okay. Last call. You can also share comments, outside of this meeting, but this is the easiest forum to kind of catch, especially anything that you feel like requires discussion.
Yeah, and if anybody has any comments, I'm going to be out pretty soon for the next week. So if you have something, you can probably just reach out to Michelle directly, and then she can follow up with Zoe or Tim or whomever.
Oh, why am I the only one ever making comments here? But I also, I wanted to say that I really liked the chart that you did on page 82 and 83, that is the project description and the responsible parties and the estimated state and completion dates, because I think the vast majority of residents really don't know what's going on. And a lot of this report is kind of at a much different level than what normal taxpayers think about. And so when you're giving them specific projects and start and end dates, I think that's really helpful, so people can kind of feel like maybe this study, they can relate to it, because a lot of it is not that relatable to the average person, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Some of it is, but a lot of it isn't.
Yeah, no, it's the reality. A lot of planning work, you know, I think when it comes to housing and open space, it's easier for people to make a really direct personal connection to it. But this kind of stuff is, you know, to some extent it is sort of abstract. So it's our job to kind of try and make it as relatable as possible, but definitely listing specific projects is really helpful to make it more concrete, and definitely want to give credit where it's due. This is mostly just compiling work from the existing City of Norwalk departments and agencies, and just kind of putting it in one place so you can see how these things are related to one another within our study area.
Right, and I think that the survey that you did on page 21, where you've got that bar graph, and then your narrative that kind of explains, yeah, there are people that are concerned about the environment. There are people that are concerned about marine use, but they do kind of overlap. And it's a challenge to get it all to overlap. Right. So the site-specific, context-sensitive approach to land use development. I mean, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
What to say is that we want to be sensitive to the stakeholders, and you know, in this analysis, we're trying to do that, as well as be environmentally sensitive and think about, you know, if the water level is going to rise and stuff like that. But we need marine use, but we need commercial use, we need residential use, you know, balancing all these things.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex a complex harbor you guys have, but it's a really exciting one. So it was really, you know, great for us to be able to work with you all to kind of parse through all that, because it's a lot of different layers to consider, and it definitely makes a difference to have people who are really embedded in it who can sort of direct us on that. So appreciate that work.
Steve, how and when do we address that the second issue we were talking about the parcels? Do we do that through the zoning rewrite?
Yeah, and I think, in addition, you know, and I think Timon's already hit on it with the minimum lot area. I think having the lot width on the street, so they have to have a certain width of property on Water Street, would probably curtail any further division of those lots. So if you know, the typical minimum would probably be 50 feet. So nobody's going to, you know, carve out a 50-foot access way. The property is just too valuable to give up.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, Zoe, we should add a few points about this issue that you brought up this evening in this document. A recommendation, maybe some sub-recommendations about ways that the zoning could frame this per that discussion, which I think was very fruitful. I hope that doesn't mess up your whole report format.
No, it doesn't. I mean, so we had, because this, you know, even from the get-go in this process, we've been kind of at one level of detail for most of the study area, and then a much more granular level of detail for the Marine Commercial District, because of how, you know, very early on it was clear that all these dimensional issues were really significant to even just get back up to the strategic direction for that area. So
there's also more market pressure there too, by the way.
So it's absolutely. So that's why we have already, you know, we've basically sectioned off that more detailed work as an appendix, because it is at a different level of detail than the rest of the report. So it would just kind of be nested in here, you know, along with those other more detailed recommendations about the Marine Commercial District, a little bit of additional sort of guidance on this issue about parcel subdivision, and sort of incentivizing some of these things through the sort of tools that you have available in zoning.
Great. Anything else, Steve or Michelle?
Nothing for me. I'm just curious if anybody else has any other comments, please. You know, now's a good time.
No, I was just in keeping with your giving credit where credit is due. I see that you gave Jeff Stedman all the photos, that aerial photos that he had, certainly his credit. and he's got, certainly if you need more, he's got another repertoire of very interesting photos from around the harbor if you want to
Absolutely.
add some visuals.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be great if it's something that he's excited about sharing with us. I think it would add a lot to the report to be able to have more of that sort of the real character and detail of the harbor kind of showing up more throughout. It's always hard for us to get our hands on really great photos, so we often assume we won't get them.
I mean, just certainly in awe with the gallery that he has of photos in around Norwalk over several years, as a matter of fact, dating back quite a few years.
There's a couple of places graphically, John, we could use them. I mean,
yeah,
I think
this
all
is
of those.
Our star right now. I think.
Yeah, I think that in a lot of those, the kind of purple pages that we have opposing the chapter lead-ins.
Yeah, just some not fillers, but again, it sort of adds to the ambiance of the
And then we could give him credit not only in the appendix, but even put a credit right on the photos if that would inspire him to. We don't have the resources to buy his photos, but it might be.
No. He's always, as far as his photos are concerned, he's certainly willing to share those as long as he gets certainly a little credit on the bottom of the photo.
Absolutely.
Well, that's something, Zoe, we should look into then. So I think that might help.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. I think it makes it feel more personable and like, I don't know, more emotionally connected to the place to have those photos.
Well, we've put together a review of Norwalk Harbor. I can certainly send it to you, and if you want to look at those photos and perhaps cherry pick which ones you would want to maybe include in the portfolio, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd love that. That'd be wonderful. Yeah, so all of the spreads, this is the table of contents, but the other spreads like this, in this case, we have some of the historic photos, but elsewhere we're really just relying on, maps and infographics to give a bit of visual engagement, which photos certainly tend to be more exciting.
I could send you the presentation that we made to DEP a while back, explaining the importance of Norwalk Harbor to the state of Connecticut.
Yeah,
we'll have those. Yeah,
great. So then I guess the last thing to share with you all is just kind of a sense of timeline. So I will just briefly flash this up on the screen. So our thinking for timeline here is that by the end of the day this Sunday, so the end of this weekend, any additional written comments you have for us beyond what you've already shared with us today, get that over to Michelle and Steve. And then if you have any additional sort of follow-up questions or things that you'd like to sort of discuss with us, reach out to the city team and us during the week of August 8th to 12th. Steve and myself will both be on vacation for some of that time. So we won't necessarily be able to sort of respond and do a full sort of feedback cycle within that time, but that'll give us the awareness if there's a sort of remaining issue. And then the city is going to work to sort of collate all of that. So far, it sounds like it might not be that much, but get us a unified set of edits by Wednesday, August 17th, and then we'll turn that around with any revisions by the 26th, so that there'll be a draft to go to the public at the end of the month. If there isn't very many comments, we might be able to finish that whole thing more quickly, but we always like to leave a little bit of room in case there is more that comes in. And then I think the other thing we wanted to kind of get some input from you all about in terms of sort of adoption process. As Steve had mentioned, there's a couple of sort of like due diligence sort of coordination meetings that should probably happen, within the city. And so we wanted to get a sense of whether it might make sense to do those coordination meetings with the draft in its current form, and just sort of note some of the areas of feedback, or if it would be best to sort of do a full revision and then circulate to those sort of internal stakeholders. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to speak to that a little bit more about the coordination items you had in mind.
Yeah, as Zoe mentioned, we were talking about, because, to be honest, at the end of the project, the UTIL and other consultants are kind of at the budget breaking point, or they've already gone over what they anticipated spending. So if we can reduce workload for them, that's great. So the question really is, based on the other information, we talked about tonight, what do you think about sending the draft out as is, or working through the small edits and sending that out to try to just save some time? I think that's it in a nutshell, Zoe, unless I didn't capture it correctly.
Yeah, I don't think that's right. Well, there was I think two committees that you had mentioned. I think it was that you wanted to get sort of buy-in from.
Yeah, so it would have to go, the steps kind of like I mentioned at the beginning, we have to amend the POCD citywide plan to incorporate this plan as part of that document. So that has to get referred out, and there's a formal adoption process for that. The two approving agencies are Planning and Zoning Commission and Economic Community Development in terms of the actual approval. So it has to go to those. We could do a presentation to them as separately or together, or however we want to do that. I'm open to any suggestions people have on that. But the first question is, do we send the document as is, or do we make these tweaks we're just kind of going through tonight and then sending that one out?
Steve, one, to set the context for that, since we're not changing the industrial zone to marine commercial, as we discussed in the first part of our agenda, and we're really talking about some fine points about the front to back parcels from water to the harbor. And I think Tammy's excellent comments about the keys we could fix lickety split. Maybe it's worth circulating the current document to all of the stakeholders now, and we bundle all of the comments up into one final redo, just based on the amount of feedback we got this evening. If the committee is okay with that.
Yeah, what we could do is maybe I could work with Michelle on putting together kind of like a compendium document that has the known edits to date, and then just tell people, yeah, we flagged these 4 or 5 things, whatever it is that we're going to change, and add some additional photos throughout the couple sections of the plan, but just keep those in mind so that we don't hear the same comment twice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would be a great way to kind of pair up the draft with, this is what we're already aware of that we're tracking. And then we can add to those any additional comments that come in from other stakeholders.
And given the amount of content in, both the thinking that we've done with this group and in the report, would it be acceptable just to send the report and ask for feedback rather than give presentations? Because to present the whole plan is a good 45-minute, to be comprehensive enough about it. What are you envisioning in terms of presentations to these groups, Steve?
That's not something I think you guys would have to do, so to ease your mind a little bit. I'm fine taking that task on. Michelle and I could probably
just doing a kind of overview, sending the report out ahead of time, and then giving an overview, but hoping that people had who were interested in the content would have read it and come prepared.
Yeah, and we've done that in the past. And again, any other group outside of those specific bodies that wanted us to walk through. I'm sure Harbor Management probably would be interested as well, and I'm sure some other groups. So we were happy to take the dog and pony show on the road.
Steve, the Harbor Management would certainly be interested in reviewing the document. We can do it through application review, for that matter.
Yeah, it's just a question of, do we do it in August? Do we do it in, well, it's already August, isn't it? Yeah. Do we do it in September? We can do it September, October, handle most of those meetings, I think.
Yeah, and we could put together a slide deck, but not the super long one, Steve, but we could work with you to come up with
condensed one based on like the draft plan ones that we had with this committee and with the public. I think we could sort of strip those down to the essentials, and
maybe a 20 slide deck that you and Michelle would have to use.
Yeah, I think you've probably got 90% of it already done.
Yeah.
And Steve, I think it could be a combined meeting to save time and I could be wrong. I don't see a lot of comments coming from the Planning and Zoning Commission, so I think it makes sense to combine them so that you don't have to do two meetings. Do it in a single meeting.
Well, I know, Steve, the Shellfish Commission, for that matter, would join the Harbor Commission, and any comment that would be made as to one meeting, for that matter, I would have no problem meeting with Planning and Zoning Group. I don't know. I would have no problem having.
Yeah, we could do it. Yeah, if you want, we can, because I know the ECD committee and P&Z both meet on the first Thursday of the month. So, I mean, we can invite you guys to that one, or if that's not going to work on your end, we could come back and do a separate one with Shellfish and Harbor. That's fine. And one additional night meeting is not going to change.
Well, we're on the fourth Wednesday of the month.
Yeah, we will.
And Steve,
Michelle's been at a lot of those anyway, so somebody's going to be there regardless. So one more is not going to make much difference on our end.
Can I ask Zoe one more question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, it's a quick one. Sorry, Lou.
I'm available. My time's yours. Okay. In fact, I have a whole nother hour on the books,
Oh, no, we want you to go home and have a good evening. On page 37, you have the Brownfield Map Site. And
yes.
Okay, so I look at that and I think, oh my gosh, the whole center core of Norwalk is a brownfield. And then I look more carefully and I see that once again, the wastewater treatment plant is a brownfield and that Oyster Shell Park is a brownfield. And if people look at that, they're going to think, what the heck? I don't want to go walking on there if it's a brownfield site. Does it really have to be like that?
Yeah, so this is a great question. This is actually something that I think we should address before circulating. So this is earlier on in the process, we had received a data set from the Norwalk Redevelopment Authority that documented some research that had been done to identify potential brownfield sites, emphasis on potential. And after more conversation, there wasn't any documented method behind that we can access, that we can understand and validate how that was determined. And in the meantime, we also took a look at the EPA database. So the red dots and the blue dots reflect the EPA database for Norwalk. So that's a more authoritative source with a very clear method. So our inclination is to remove the layer that you're seeing currently in the orange, because that is the Norwalk Redevelopment Authority data set that we don't have good documentation for, and just show the EPA data so that it's more defensible. If somebody has a question, we have a clear method to point to, a clear source, and that we don't cause alarm when we don't have a good justification for it. We know that there is the potential for some of these sites to have contamination just based on sort of the intuitive, prior use. This is an industrial part of the city. It's not unusual for there to be some contamination, but I don't think there's any reason to really spark that level of concern in the community when we don't have a good documentation of the data.
Zoe, what was the definition they were using for brownfields? I mean, what type of chemicals were they discussing?
So I can pull up some of the we can give a little bit of more of a description of the criteria from EPA.
I see where we had, for example, Oyster Shell Park. I mean, that was the old city dump, years back.
Yeah.
But then again, if you really wanted to get technical, if you look at Veterans Park, that also was, so we'd have just about the whole waterfront area covered. I mean, unnecessarily.
Right.
Yeah,
So that's exactly the spirit of why we think it might make sense to remove that orange layer.
Typically the first high level designation are post-industrial sites where there's some history of former toxic, noxious uses. And there's usually a first map done, which is, you should check this out. These are sites that you should check out because we know there used to be a tannery here or something. And I suspect that that's what those are probably all former industrial operations that tee up a kind of first level analysis. And why the two parks are treated differently might just be the date of the data.
Yeah, so I think
those red dots also make, like the Sono collection. Do we want to think that the Sono collection is a potential brownfield? That would be sort of a black eye for the city.
Yeah, I mean, this one is, one of the other things that's sort of maybe worth spelling out more clearly in this is you can be a brownfield that is remediated, right? There are precautions that you can go through to contain any potential contaminants, right? So I think that's sort of a bigger piece, like educational piece.
Yeah, I think that part of this too is this map is here precisely because there was a group of stakeholders that wanted us to include a map like this. And so I just
prove a point of some sort.
Just want to balance the potential reception of this map by some audiences versus editing it all out and having another set of stakeholders. I don't know, Steve and Michelle, what do you feel about this?
I tend to, I think that I don't think there's a point in putting it in if we don't have strong data on it. And I think Tammy's instincts are correct. I think my always worry when you have something like this in there is somebody seizes on this specific thing within the plan and then they dismiss everything else in the plan, no matter how good it is, because they're focused on that. So
yes, so I think
Steve, I tend to agree with you on that. I guess you be very careful as far as what they're talking about as far as chemical. I mean, you can have some very, how should I say, there's non-toxic. There are chemicals that are spilled, but there are chemicals that are toxic, and there are chemicals that are relatively non-toxic, but they're still chemicals. But I think that there's no clear definition that I can see right now of where those areas are contaminated.
Yeah, so I mean, I think like for what's the red dots and the blue dots, so that has that we can go back into the EPA database and pull like a really specific definition of what they mean by that. For the orange sites, we don't have any backup information. So we really don't have anything to go on to evaluate the risk level that's implied by the orange ones.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably in everyone's best interest to remove that orange layer, because we just really, if anybody has any questions, we don't have anything to go to.
But Zoe, I'm wondering then, because a lot of those dots are outside of our study area, I guess they're not. I mean,
the only ones that are close to the study area are right here and sort of in the area, the Sono kind of area inland. But yeah, there are no, in the EPA database, there are no potential or confirmed brownfield sites within our study area.
And I think we should probably take the map out entirely. I guess that's seems to be the direction this group and Steve are headed.
Well, Tim, I definitely agree. If you have no clear-cut evidence as to what type of chemical spills you had there, is that supposition, or is it recognized data that go along with those?
Well, the dots are recognized data.
Yeah,
Okay.
the dots have data backup and a clear method and definitions. The orange does not.
Okay.
So
it's sort of
go ahead.
interesting, the little, what are you calling it, blue or green dot, over to the east of the wastewater treatment plant. I mean, that's a residential street right there. Sorry, I'm just looking at Google Maps. I'm just trying to get there. Where am I?
These are all pinpointed by GIS data, right? So
Yeah, correct. Yeah, this is coming directly from the EPA GIS data sets.
I agree that there's so little impact on the project area that removal of the entire map makes sense to me.
yeah, they're not really germane to anything we're proposing or not proposing. And none of those dots, except for the one uphill from Divine, or even in our study area. So I think we just scrap this.
Yeah, because it's sort of funny that the two big chemically type places that are in our study area, King Industries and Divine, don't have any dots.
Exactly.
And if a resident sees this and they think they're living in one of these brownfield areas, like Charles Street or Pleasant Street, wherever that is, off of 4 Point Street on the other side of the river, or up on Arch, or no, not Arch, like Harbor Avenue somewhere, there's a lot of residences in there.
Yeah, and I think the challenge here is that because of King and the former industrial uses, the people that were asking for this information were assuming that there were registered brownfields within our study area, and our finding is, except for that, the kind of beige designation, there are no official ones, and so we probably have to message that at least in some text.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that we, as everyone's saying, remove this map and include a sentence that's basically describing that within the EPA data set, and give a little sense of what this data set is. There are no potential or confirmed brownfields within our study area, despite the history of industrial use.
Per the EPA's
and just
data set.
Exactly. Make it really clear this is a very authoritative, source. It's not like it's an open question. It's they are the authority on these issues.
Well, the healthy, sustainable, resilient ecosystem, I think, is a worthy paragraph up at the top. I mean, that's that's like what you aspire to, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we can sort of give lip service to the brownfields and contamination issue, even if we're, saying to our knowledge, this is not a confirmed issue within our study area.
I think while the EPA does not designate any brownfields within our study area, the past industrial history of the sites means that any future development would have to analyze and consider actual soil conditions, blah, blah, blah. I think there's a softer acknowledgement that there was a former, and that it would be the responsibility of future private investors to research that.
Well, certainly in all fairness, Tim, there's one area that seems to be of a question, and that is right opposite Oyster Shell Park to the south, where that blue dot is. No, yeah, right here, right in that area, right above that, right there. Right, yeah, to the left of where you're talking.
These spots here.
One in there, yeah. They had still some burial of. Was
it like oil tanks?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that being mentioned at some point. I think it's like there's a lot of this. I imagine that's where, like, if somebody was around to tell us about the Norwalk Redevelopment Authority data set, I would imagine it comes from some of that local knowledge about past uses, but it just doesn't have any documentation behind it, so we really don't have much to go on.
Yeah, the problem with this always is that it's in neither municipal governments or private landowners' interests to invite the EPA to come designate your site. So I think because it comes down to liability and so I think a softer statement that many if not most of the sites in our study area were once in industrial operations, and it as the land is redeveloped, the city individual owners will have to, working in conjunction with individual owners, would have to assess the environmental conditions of specific parcels, but we can't assess it now.
That's the whole Connecticut Transfer Act too, where that if it's a, listed property, they're going to have to go through at a minimum a phase 1 investigation and then probably a phase 2. So it's going to happen regardless.
Tim, just pass your proposed language past Steve and Michelle.
Do that. We'll come up with something with them.
Okay.
No, that's a very good point. Thank you, Tammy.
Yeah, agreed. It's something that we were sort of was on our radar as well, but I think this was a really productive conversation and good to talk through as a group, because it's certainly there are trade-offs to kind of showing or not showing it, and I think we have a good logic for how we want to deal with this, and we'll just go ahead and draft up some language to that effect. Any other odds and ends? Got 40 more minutes.
Yeah, we don't need
Nothing?
to use them.
I know. All right. Well, I guess on that note, just want to really, extend our appreciation to all of you for your time and for your care for the harbor. It makes a big difference for us and makes our recommendations better and more relevant to your community. So, yeah, thank you for all your time and input, and we'll look forward to seeing this get enacted.
Right. Thank you, and Tim, for your patience with us.
No, I've really enjoyed this group and this process. It's been good conversations. I've liked the kind of thinking through the issues, and we've really enjoyed it. So thanks to everybody.
And Zoe, I'll send you those photographs.
Yeah, perfect.
Presentations. You can cherry pick what you'd like.
Yeah, and we'll follow up. I think we may need higher resolution versions for the report, so we'll follow up with Jeff and
what catches your eye, and then I'll approach Jeff.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, and Steve, by the way, have a good vacation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You too, Zoe.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. You too, both of you.
Yeah.
I guess Michelle and I will be holding down the fort.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, be nice to them while we're away. Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thanks so much,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.